leaders are those who, when they see problems in the world, will, even it's not, it doesn't have to be their problem, but they're like, no, I feel like I'm called to do something about that, and then they'll take up leadership. Mm-hmm. And I think this is actually what we need as we're talking about raising up leaders. We need people who will see a problem or obstacle and go, you know what? I'm in. I'm going to do something about this.
In this Disciple Standard podcast episode, we start to address the elephants in the room, especially ones that was posted on the Facebook group. And we address the fears of and tensions that arise between having a grassroots local church movement and how that interacts between centralized denominational offices. Are there going to be factions that arise? Is there going to be a split that arises? What's the heart behind it all? Where is prayer? And how do we honor previous generations' efforts in raising leaders in a church movement? Now, we address all of that. And, I thought it was helpful to do that in a video format rather than text or comment, because you lose a lot of the tone and heart behind that. While we address all that, this podcast still really surprised me. The conversations really surprised me because of how practical it was when we started talking about a gospel identity, the process for shaping our identity in light of the gospel, and whose responsibility is it when these obstacles or problems come up in life. I think a lot of times we look around the world and we can easily blame or deny a problem, or say it's someone else's problem, or complain. I know certainly that's true for myself. But this episode, while addressing the decline in the CRC, that's the vehicle that we were talking about, but really it's a problem of self-responsibility and the identity that seeks to answer that question. If you're involved in this Multiply movement or not, I thought this was a very, eye-opening, brain-building conversation that I think anyone would really appreciate. So I hope you enjoy and listen through the whole thing. It's a really fruitful conversation. Thanks for watching.
The future is now.
Welcome back to the Disciple Standard podcast. Glad you're joining us. My name is Aaron, Aaron, your anchor man for today, and we've got another panel here of familiar faces, loved ones, great pastors here. First and foremost, we got the wise one, Zach Olson, over there. How are you doing, Zach?
Fantastic. It's a great day.
His wisdom.
The wisdom is
exuding.
I am eager to hear the wisdom today.
That's baldness and light.
Well,
That's what that is.
Well, we got two of that then.
Yes.
So
the glare off of our
a lot
bald
of
heads.
exuding here today.
we've got two of that, and then I've got enough hair for the both of you guys. But we got two. We've got Mr. Multiply himself, Pastor Scott Vanderplug. Welcome back to your own podcast.
Okay.
You started this, but it's now mine, but it's back to you. Anyway, glad to have you guys both on here. There's a lot to talk about, especially with the Multiply Conference. If you guys are interested in joining that, the link's down below, conference.multiply222.com. It's a time where we could start a discussion on where we are as a CRC, NA, and where could we go? What are we doing? How we want to gather people together and start this conversation, set a new vision, a renewed vision, get some excitement going on. And if you want to be a part of that, just go ahead and click the link down below and register today. It's coming up in a couple weeks here by the time this podcast comes out. However, we are here to address elephants in rooms. The thing is, you had put out, Scott, a 2 posts on the Facebook group page, the Reformed Pastors of the CRC NA. The first one was a 20 theses post where it stated 20 theses that you thought this conference should be about. We actually shot a whole podcast on it. Please check that out if you want to hear Scott in his own words kind of describe and walk through most of those points on there. However, you also did put action steps together. Could you tell us a little bit the history putting these action steps together? Was this written out with other people? What's the heart behind it? And we'll start there and we'll go into some of the comments.
Yeah, okay, that's good. I think as we've been preparing for the conference, our first big push is just we wanted to gather the church up. And by the way, that's going well. We have a lot of people from most every classis registering. And we're anticipating that we're going to have a very good group of people here representative of the entire denomination. So that's awesome, and we're looking forward to it. Now, as we've turned toward the content, I've been working very closely with Tim Sheridan and Vivi Cassis from Resonate. They're really the denominational connection point. Tim's been put in that role by the General Secretary's office and others. So we've been working very closely together, and we realized that if you're going to have a conference like this, it can't just be a gathering that's about nothing. It has to be about something. So we've spent a lot of time talking together, and eventually that coalesced into these 20 theses. And then we wrote at the same time 20 action steps. And so this was sort of like our shared thoughts about, first of all, the underlying philosophy, I think, of what we're going to try to do together in this conference and otherwise, and then just some thoughts about, all right, leaving the conference, what are some of the kinds of things that, we don't want to just have there's kind of, what's it called? It's called the illusion of cognitive experience. So the illusion of cognitive experience is like, maybe you can best be the example of like college kids who are, in their dorm room talking about fighting world poverty. And they all share their ideas with each other. And when they're done, they're like, okay, we solved it. But actually, there's not a single person who was in poverty yesterday who's not in poverty tomorrow.
Yeah.
But you have the illusion that just because you came and talked it over, something happened. And we don't want this conference to be like this, that we gather denomination up, we talk about something, and then we just live in the illusion that like things changed. No, we actually needed to start thinking like there has to be some concrete action steps that lead from the conference to some new day. So, we don't really know. The conference is going to have its own character and things are going to happen there, and we can't anticipate all that, but we started thinking about the kinds of things. And so, we're thinking about it more in terms of like a draft of, here's at least some first thoughts we have about a direction leaving from the conference. And that would help us guide the conference itself if we kind of know, like, here's where we think we're all going together. So we worked on that and then, published those. We separated them. We agreed I'd publish the theses first and then gather some reaction to all that and then publish the draft of, what the anticipated action steps might be leaving the conference to just get some feedback about that. So that's what happened. And, of course, we got feedback.
Yeah. What's the feedback been like?
I think it's varied. I was kind of surprised a little bit. Maybe it's fair for me to say this, that I'm not sure that anyone interacted with the content as much as like the surrounding issues or tone or something like that. So, I think some of the big action steps, and these are things that I view as really big things. One is that we want to commit ourselves to raising up 2,000 leaders in the next decade. And another is that our Church of 1,000 churches wants to commit itself to planting 1,000 congregations in the next decade. These are like massive ideas and they would cause huge change. And we are going to have to take massive and perfect gospel-sized action to accomplish these kinds of things. And as we've talked about it, one of the things is we're going to kind of give the rationale as how we landed at those numbers, to people. Here's how we came up with the number 2,000. It wasn't just merely plucked out of the air. But what we realize is now everybody who's attending it has a job to do, which is to go back to their classis. And every classis is now got to respond and say, hey, we think we can do 50 leaders in the next decade. And the next class is going to say, well, we think we can do 25. And then other classes may pick more, other classes may pick less, but then a real number, not just a round number like 2,000 will emerge. That'll become like our pressing vision for the next decade together. Anyway, I guess I would just say we didn't get a lot of interaction in the comment sections of these posts around the content, and I think these are really big things. So maybe people are still processing that, and maybe it just has to wait for the conference itself.
Zach, in your experience, you've worked a lot with different churches, raising up leaders, even seeing leaders into a next transition of their life. How daunting for me? Like I don't know how big of the number. I'm like 2,000 sounds doable, but Scott's saying this is daunting. What's your general take on the weightiness or the gravitas of this figure? 2,000.
Yeah, so I think my answer would have been different 5 years ago compared to what it is today.
Really?
So having been part of Sunlight, I have a different perspective on it. And it's not because I have a different perspective on like should ministry leaders be raising up other ministry leaders. I think any pastor you talk to will say yes. Like I would love to, and I want to, and I'm trying to raise up leaders. I think Sunlight has helped me see how much more possible it really is. And for a couple of reasons. One of the things is at Sunlight, it is like our culture that we need to be looking to raise up leaders. We have systems in place to raise up leaders, and we have opportunities for those leaders to get engaged. And so I think those things, when they're in place, you think, this actually is possible. Like I've got a roadmap to do it. And so, for example, like our classis at our last meeting, we set a goal for 10 years to raise up 200 leaders. 200 plus. And Sunlight itself picked a ridiculously high number. But I think it's possible, right? So I think, like me now, I think it's not daunting. It's real. And it's like, okay, let's get to it. 6 years ago, when I was in a local church prior to this, I would have thought, all right, I started 222 Disciple with 8 guys. And not a single one of those guys took on a disciple.
Yeah.
How in the world am I going to do this? Yep. So I think your context makes all the difference.
Yeah, gotcha. Even like people who like success stories or anything like that, or opportunities or like a plan,
Well, and I think it's, again, it just doesn't happen as often as every pastor wants it to. And so I think for that reason alone, saying 2,000 leaders in 10 years, number.
If you were to change one thing to make that happen within the CRCNA, what would that be? I'm sure there's a lot of things to change, right? Let's just a few things. But if you change one thing, most impactful.
You know what I would do? I think the thing that I would want to change the most would be some kind of combination like of personal responsibility and permission among our pastors. Now, when I say this, I don't mean that pastors aren't trying. What I mean is, like, I really, really would want our pastors to, like, just own and hold and let it take root that, like, you can do it, and it should be, like, your main focus. All the work you do is really important, but raising up leaders is got to be at the top. And so, schedule one less meeting. And I know all of this stuff. I know what it sounds like to a pastor, but I hope pastors out there listening will say, okay, here's a pastor who knows what it's like and is now on the other side of it and like who's making it a priority. Like it's really possible.
So you said personal responsibility and permission. Is that what you were missing 5 years ago?
Especially the personal responsibility part. Because I think what I fell into was this idea of like, I tried, but nobody responded. Well, the thought process should have been, I tried, it just didn't work with these guys. I got to try again. And I got to keep trying until I find it hitting. That's what it was.
Yeah, I think this idea of personal responsibility is really important because when we take on a personal responsibility as pastors, especially any kind of problem or let's say a decline in our churches, in our church, in our denomination, if we take that on as our personal responsibility, then maybe there's a little bit of angst maybe there's a little bit of like holy discontentment, and we want to see something change. We want to see some kind of renewal or revival, or just something to change the course of direction, as it were. But sometimes when we do that, other past generations might consider that that's a little bit arrogant. That's what we've been trying to do. Maybe you don't think that's what we've been trying to do for the last 20 years, 30 years. And this was some of the tone maybe that we could catch in regarding renewed vision for the CRC. This is what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to, faithfully been raising up leaders and faithfully trying to follow the Bible and God's leading and the Spirit-led movements of the last 3-4 decades. So how do we address that? How do we honor faithful ministry of the previous generations without assuming that the current renewal efforts are dismissive of the past? How do we look at honest humility, and how do we adopt that while trying to direct and cause change, or look for change, or look for a new direction?
Yeah, I think one of it's just with the tone. So in the 20 theses and in the action steps, I think it's really clear that we're not trying to disparage anybody else's efforts. This is all the things in there really are what we're all trying to do and what we all want to see happen. So I think it's a combination of just not speaking disparagingly about other people's efforts, and also giving each other the benefit of the doubt, that something happening in one's season of active ministry doesn't cast any kind of value judgment on previous attempts. Everything is seasonal. And so if this is the season where it's going to take off, praise God. Why? Is it because those who are leading it now are so much more better or gifted? Nope. It's just, this is when the Spirit's moving in a way that, it's not up to us in some ways.
In my previous, just a quick story, my previous ministry context, I ran the ministry and I handed it off. And part of me is like, man, I hope this thing fails. I'm so important, the sinful part of me, right? I'm like, what? You can't do it as good as I did it. Yeah. Or they're going to find out how good of a leader I was. Yeah. But then the other part of me is like, man, I hope this does really well. I remember, I don't know, just years ago, the pastor Francis Chan, he was talking about leaving his mega church. And why he left, or even his theology, whatever, I don't really know. But he left the mega church, and he said something about his church. He said, I really believe that the leaders of this church is going to take this church and make it even bigger than before, more impactful than I could have ever done it. My time here has come to an end. And I really love that mentality, this mentality of passing the baton and hoping for the best and trusting that wasn't his church. It was God's church first and foremost, and the Spirit leads to results or growth or whatever. And he was like, I believe that the leadership here is going to, make you guys flourish even more so than I could have ever done it. I always thought that was, I took that lesson for myself whenever I feel that kind of I fail type of thing. Scott, do you have any reactions?
I guess various different thoughts. I think, first of all, when it comes to the Christian Reformed Church, I'm a person who's all the way bought in. I consider the Christian Reformed Church to be my mother. I'm all the way bought in. So part of the reason I'm all the way bought in is that there's been kind of a faithful church that inspired me to really buy in all the way to even become a leader in it. So start with recognizing that there's something there that I perceive to be very, very good. I think every new generation faces new issues. I think from basically the mid-1990s onward, the church has faced a new challenge, the challenge of the rise of secularism. We're not the only denomination facing that. Most denominations are, but we've been in a massive and serious decline. And I don't know, at some point in the middle of all that decline, I got involved in becoming aware of it and even sort of found myself at the center of those issues because I got asked to be part of Calvin's seminaries. At that time, it was called the Church Renewal Lab, and they were pastors. This is where I first met Zach, who are coming to Calvin's seminary, and they're starting to think about, wow, our churches are in decline. What do we do about it? And I had kind of become a leader in this Church Renewal Lab through a friend, Carl Bosma, who kind of twisted my arm and told me I should become a part of it, along with Keith Dornbos. Keith and I really hit it off, and I probably had just been more about my Florida context until then, and now I started seeing what was happening across the whole denomination. And now in our own classes, and we've talked about this, we were starting to face massive decline where all of the original founder churches in our classes were closing their doors. And I started to really pay attention to this. And I remember at one point I had this thought, and the thought was, I could just concentrate on Sunlight and not care about all these other churches in our classes or not care about the decline in the denomination. But I had this thought that it was like a relay race, that we're all in together, and the baton had been handed to my generation of leaders. And either I could take that baton and try to appreciate the heritage that went before, but now try to sprint through my part of the race, or I could just, like I said, concentrate more narrowly on just this little thing here in Florida and, not pay that much attention, just put some blinders on to the rest of what was happening. And I just felt the weight of previous generations handing the baton to my generation. And by the way, as I'm going along on ministry, I have a huge thought about passing the baton to the next generation. Aaron, you're a part of that. There's a lot of people in this ministry who I feel like, hey, I'm also passing the baton, so to speak. There'll be other leaders who come behind me. So those are all ways that I just sort of think about this is, okay, in my time, there's this great verse in Acts chapter 13 about David. And it's quick. It just says, when David had served the purposes of God in his own generation, he fell asleep, which means he died. And I think what I love about that is God had purposes for David in his own generation. David's problems weren't other people's generations. It was, he was serving God's purposes in his own generation. I think this is how the kingdom of God works. In each generation, there's new issues, there's new problems, and we may be called to serve God in a whole variety of ways. And so we don't have to disparage any previous generation, nor do we have to curse any future generation to pretend we're the best and the people coming after us are the worst, or the people before us didn't know what they were doing and we're the first people who do know what we're doing. We don't know what we're doing.
Right.
We're just trying to serve God as best as we can based on the real life issues that are in front of us. And it's a very challenging time, or has been. I've used this image before. I think for many people from the mid-90s onward, pastors have been working as hard as they can, and it's like the tide is going out and we're swimming against the tide. So no matter how hard we swim, collectively, we're all still facing losses. And my hope, and it could be delusion, but my hope is perhaps the tide has just started to shift back to the other way. And all of that swimming practice we had, swimming so hard, all of a sudden the efforts, with God shifting the tide the other way, will produce something that maybe, previous generations yearned for. Or maybe we'll just keep swimming hard and it'll be a future generation who reaps those gains.
Right. Yeah, this goes in line with that personal responsibility that we're talking about, and you added the layer or the dimension of passing the baton.
I just sent Jake a graphic. So I had no idea that I would send him this graphic or that we'd talk about this. But I have a friend, Oren Woodward. He's actually a New York Times bestselling author. He's one of my best friends. And we started having conversations this spring about identity. And anyway, he came up with this little graphic that he's been using. And he says, hey, Scott, I'm using this in my business, but I think there's something here about sanctification. And I think maybe he's right. So we have the start, and then the first thing that comes up is identity. Who am I? And then there'll be some obstacle. Something happens, right? And all of us face all kinds of, like, as you walk through life, you're going to face setbacks and obstacles and whatever. And then there's a central question, am I responsible? And the answer is either yes or no. And what he basically says is out of your identity, you'll either be willing to, okay, here's this problem. There's a problem in the world. Am I responsible? As Christians, if you say, oh, I'm a child of God and God has a calling in my life, then as you see that problem, it's in front of your eyes, you might be willing to pick it up. Okay, I will be responsible for this problem. No one has to be responsible for any problem. It could just be that there's a problem, and what does this have to do with me? But if you pick it up, then what ends up happening is you start to have a little bit of a dream. Mm-hmm. So maybe in this instance, I'm kind of dreaming about a better Christian Reformed church. Like, hey, this denomination that's been my mother, I'm dreaming that something could happen here. And then that dream produces some hope. And then he says there's a little process. First, you sort of think about, well, what could I do? You make a plan. Then you do it. It either works or doesn't work. You take a check. Hey, that worked, that didn't work, and then you make an adjustment. So I'm thinking about Zach. You just say, hey, I first started discipling. I discipled 8 guys. No one would do it. And what you could do is you're like, okay, I planned and I did, but you never checked or adjusted, and so you just give up, in which case you send yourself back to the other side. I can't be responsible for this.
Drama.
Or you make an adjustment and say, oh, let me try this or let me try that. Yep. And eventually you get it working. Mm-hmm. And it all starts with your identity and this sense of like, hey, I'm a child of God and God's put this in front of me. And I got this little dream about how this could be better, or we could work through this obstacle or however. Mm-hmm. And then what ends up happening is through faith, this whole process of faith, you get some victory. And if so, that reduplicates your identity. Oh, God can use me. I can be a part of the solution or whatever. And now you realize like, oh, the gospel actually did change my life and it had an effect. Anyway, he says the opposite is you have some obstacle and you say, am I responsible? And you're like, no, I'm actually a victim. And so you begin to blame, you deny, you complain, you avoid. So you know what? This whole problem is that person's fault, and I deny that I'm a part of it at all. And you know what? I'm so sick of those people over there that caused this obstacle, and I don't even want to come near it. And what ends up happening then is that produces worry and fear, which you become a victim, and then that cycles back up to identity. I think Oren is really onto something here. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the reasons that I believe, and our conference is going to start this way, that we have to start with our gospel identity. You know, unless you know that you are redeemed, saved, forgiven, child of God, who is now at work in this creation as a prince or princess of the universe, you know, it'll be very easy when some obstacle occurs to be like, ah, poor me, and go down the drama cycle rather than the dream cycle.
And when you do that, I really encourage you to camp out on the obstacle part of this as a tool that God uses to shape identity.
Yes.
Because what I hear so often and what I see in my heart so often is when we're doing something, even something that we feel we're called to, an obstacle happens, and then we spiritualize it right away to say, oh, God must not be telling me to go that direction. And I've never read a Bible story or account where an obstacle has been placed by God, which is a signal to stop. Right? I mean, I'm sure there are, but the idea is there's always like it's a proving ground for exactly this.
So I think Oren created this because he sees something about the process of leadership. Mm-hmm. Leaders are those who, when they see problems in the world, will, even if it's not, it doesn't have to be their problem, but they're like, no, I feel like I'm called to do something about that, and then they'll take up leadership. Mm-hmm. And I think this is actually what we need as we're talking about raising up leaders. We need people who will see a problem or obstacle and go, you know what? I'm in. I'm going to do something about this. So I didn't know we were going to start talking about this, but yeah, Oren and I credit Oren for actually coming up with the drawing. We spent hours talking about this before he came up with this, and I'm like, man, Oren, I think you're really onto something. He's like, yeah. He said to me, he's like, once I created it, I started thinking to myself that we need to talk more about sanctification and how God uses it. And exactly what you were just saying, Zach, usually we don't become more patient by, having our life get freed of all reasons to become patient.
Yep. That's right.
We usually become more patient by getting into situations where, we have to wait.
Yep. You don't become a strong swimmer by swimming with the tide.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the obstacle, I think, is key, and our world is filled with problems.
Yeah.
And to some certain extent, our Christian Reformed Church is facing problems. We could easily just say, you know what? Other people did this. It's their fault. They were horrible. Let's not talk about it. Let's bury our head in the sand, whatever. Or we could, hey, look, when you first start, you just have this sense like, man, I have some hope that God could use me. You come up with a plan. You don't know if it's a good plan or it's not a good plan, but you try it. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't work, then you make an adjustment and try again. And I think the idea, this is also great because I would say this, I don't know, Zach, if you'll agree. I've been in the Christian Reformed Church a long time. We tend to have a little bit of a perfectionist mentality, we're not going to start something until we know we can do it perfectly. I think to some certain extent our denomination is influenced particularly by academics, and the best thing to do is get all A's. So we learn to avoid failure. But actually, in the life process, there's no way you're going to know perfectly how to face every obstacle, and that means you're going to have to try things that fail and then learn from it and try some more things that fail and learn from that and keep on making adjustments until, something is gaining some traction and working. And then, then you really start to work with that. So I don't think we're all that comfortable with not knowing what we're doing, but I think every obstacle demands, this is new. What previous generation of the church in a 20, 25-year period of time faced the kind of decline, that I guess it happened in Europe first, but what do? We have no idea. So we have to say it's possible and there's hope. And I think that's, I don't know. I'm glad we could talk about this today.
What's interesting is about the perfectionism idea. I do a lot with the Berkman assessment. Oh. And so in my time with Thrive and Pastor Church Resources before that, getting to meet with a lot of pastors and go over their Berkman with them, one of the components of behavior that we talk about is about decision making. And by and large, our pastors are in a spot where they tend to like a lot of time and a lot of information before making a decision. And the fear of not having enough time or not having the right plan is that the risk is too high, or there's going to be some kind of negative consequence. And so I think it's a perfectionism, but I also think it's it's kind of like our personality is we like to have our ducks in a row before we go. And the antidote to that is saying, man, once we get to 75, 80% of a good plan, you just execute it.
Yeah. Or, in my mind, even a 50%, because you don't know. You've never faced this problem.
You do like the 50%.
You don't know. So you just got to put something together. And I think actually most people suffer from analysis paralysis.
For sure.
Like you're saying. Mm-hmm. I think actually needing to believe that our current plan is the only plan, and that if this doesn't work, nothing will ever work. Most likely the first things we try aren't going to work. But we've got to get out there and try, from which, when we do it, we're going to have this learning process, checking and adjusting, and then we'll adjust. We'll come up with a new plan.
Yeah.
But you'll never get to the second plan until you tried the first one.
That's right. So I would love this graphic to make into a poster to put in my conference room.
Oh, really?
This would be great. Oh, yeah.
I love this graphic. I think, first of all, Oren's a genius. And it's interesting. We went to Chicago Cubs game. You were there. And on the train ride back from Miami to West Palm Beach, we took up this question of identity. And how do people, who are they, how do they view themselves, and how do they interact with the world? And we started realizing that this question of identity is just so important. And this is what the gospel gives us, is it gives us a new identity. The world might have told us we're a failure. The world might have told us that we're no good. The world might have told us that we can't. People grow up with parents telling them that. People grow up with all kinds of teachers and everyone else saying, you're never going to amount to anything. And then God comes up, it's like, I chose you. I love you. You have a place in my kingdom. I can work through you. And that shift of identity allows, when the obstacle comes up, you're like, wow, God actually chose me, and now he's ordered the circumstances of my life so that in my own generation, I can serve the purposes of God. And so we're willing, instead of to get into the drama cycle of like, oh man, this happened to me, and I blame this person, blame, deny, complain, avoid, we can get into what he calls the dream cycle, where we start to have some hope. And even if things aren't working out, that identity just fuels us to keep at it until finally, maybe things will work or maybe they don't. But you just keep at it. And that, once you sense God's Spirit affirming this process, that comes back into your identity.
So, Aaron, you're talking about, one part of this conversation was, how do we make sure that we don't just totally walk right over the contributions of past generations and that. But you also talked about the perception of arrogance of this generation as they're taking it up. And we certainly want to avoid arrogance. We don't want to think more highly of ourselves than we ought to. But I do think we have to have a very robust sense of ownership over it. So, and that might look like arrogance, but we've got to own it. We've got to take responsibility for it. And so when you take ownership of something, you naturally have a sense of energy and passion around it. And we have to avoid the pitfall of arrogance, but we really have to say, it's our time to run with this ball, and we're going to.
I think, Okay,
I'm going to say one other thing. This is probably it's probably not a good comment, but I'm going to say it anyway. I can remember being a teenager, sitting in church, and one of the things that distressed me was that we would have pastors. I'm not going to call anyone out, but we would have pastors, and their sermons, they'd read a Bible passage, they'd close the Bible, and then they had these stories that they would tell, and they weren't all that related to the Bible. And I can remember that I started reading the Bible on my own, and it really captivated me. So I can remember as a teenager that I'd have the Bible out, the pastor would be talking about something, and then I'd just keep reading the Bible. And I remember thinking to myself, I wonder why in church we don't talk more about the Bible. This is really fascinating. I was sort of bored by these stupid anecdotal stories that the pastor was telling. I mean, that's just my way of saying it. And I can remember thinking to myself, even as a teenager, man, this could be done better. Okay? Some of that's just the arrogance of youth. But I remember that, and one of the things that I think to myself, actually, is that most young people, as they feel a call into ministry, will probably feel something like that. You know what? I can do it better. And instead of saying, hey, young whippersnapper, you don't know what you're talking about and you don't know what the challenges are yet or whatever. Just be like, go for it.
Do it. Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is that right or wrong? But if there are some people who are like, this could be better. So I'm just thinking, man, we got some people in their 20s and 30s and they're like restless because they think this could be so much better. Instead of like chiding them, like, oh, you think you're so much better than me? I don't know. I kind of admire and like it a little bit when I see some young pastors or some young leaders being like, yeah, I don't like the way they did it back then. I can do it better. Okay, they don't know anything yet. Yes, time will help them temper those. They'll eventually run into the same obstacles and have to learn the same way we did. But is there anything wrong with somebody having some hope that like they could make a bigger or better positive contribution? Maybe that's the wrong thing to say. But I just mean to say, I hope that there'll be some younger pastors here who feel such an inspiration and they'll be like, you know what, we can do better, let's go. And let's not stop their enthusiasm. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. God will decide all that. You know, it could be that in a previous generation, people were swimming harder with more skill and getting less results. In a future generation, there'll be a bunch of fools who can't swim at all, but the tide is just pushing them in. And they'll be like, look at us, we're such good swimmers. And let's not care about ourselves so much. Let's just praise God. Okay, thank goodness, God's brought the tide in. And, you know, let's just be grateful for the movement in God's kingdom and without concern for, I don't know, it's good for young people to respect their elders.
Way to tie that up.
Yeah.
But I think it's good for elders to respect the passion of youth.
I think when we see the passion of youth, it's back to what Zach said. It's like they're owning it now. They're like finding a sense of ownership, and that's why they're restless, because they want to affect change on it. I don't know. I don't want to move too fast. We've got a lot on this topic right now, but I just didn't want to move too fast past that identity comment, because you really put a wrinkle in the smooth brain over here. Like, I really am learning something right now, because you can see this effect. I don't want to belabor this, but it's just such a deep framework to understand the world and understand yourself, because then there's so many things, right? Like through the process of that plan, do, check, and adjust, you start to develop things. Like there starts to be an effects that are outside yourself that you're actually impacting the world, and there's obviously there's effects of what this is talking about inside, right? So like the world becomes a place where you are affecting change, but inside yourself you are developing character, you're developing competence. Oren would say you're developing your craft, like the skills and abilities, and people are looking at that and looking at the results, and you're building trust. And then this is the cycle of what he calls sanctification, but it's kind of leading automatically. Sanctification leads into leadership, right? So it's like the more you are being sanctified by these obstacles, and you're trying to do these things, and you're letting God work in your life and dreaming and hopeful and faithful, you see yourself as a victor. But then that victor mentality becomes leadership mentality, and you want to pass that off to other people. I mean, we could talk a little bit about the opposite side of that framework, but yeah, that's to me is what I'm thinking through, is like this is what every pastor in the CRC needs, myself included, myself being the first one, is like, okay, let's just start down this path, check and adjust, and kind of work through the character in me that needs to be rooted out, and build up the character that needs to be built up, and then to re-solidify an identity individually for myself. Then we do that 2,000 times over with new leaders, and we've got a whole new denomination on our hands in 20 years.
Maybe you want to do a separate podcast on this, but
At 100%, yeah.
That comment was interesting, or intrigued me anyway. Is like when we have a victor mentality, it leads toward leadership.
Yeah.
Like we'll take the baton or the ball or whatever. How does the victim mentality relate to leadership? Like, do they want a leader? Do they want to become a leader?
Yeah. Yeah, so I just thought about this 5 minutes ago, right? So I'm working through this, right? My brain's wrinkling as we speak.
Is this your responsibility?
Well, that's the first place, right? That's the first place.
Because I think, like, just off the top of my head, I would think if you're a victim, you don't want to take leadership because
Right.
then you're not a victim, you're wrong.
That's almost like the first question we got to ask ourselves at this conference, like, hey, is this your responsibility individually? Can we make this our responsibility? Now we can move somewhere. Like once we take, if someone's saying no, drama, worry, blame, we're going to expect all that, complain, avoid. No one who's going to say, this is my responsibility is going to be denying, right? That's impossible. It is your responsibility now if you actually believe that. So yeah, I'm excited to like kind of extrapolate more of this probably in a future podcast. I don't know, maybe this is the podcast, but we do have more to address here. This is the
Sorry, don't move on.
Yeah, fine, no problem. It's too good.
I think this thing is something else. I do think, going back to, we met first at the renewal lab, and that first renewal lab, Carl Bosma, I will never forget this. I can picture where we were at Calvin Seminary. I can picture where I was sitting, where he was standing. And he just said, if you're not meeting with unbelievers, your church is never going to grow. It's your responsibility. Nobody else is going to do this for you. Your elders are not going to make you do it. You have to do it. And that was the first time. I'd already been a pastor at that point for like 6 years. And I had never had anybody tell me, this is your responsibility. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
You're right. I got to do this.
Yeah. That's good. I'm glad you added that.
That's how only he can say it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad he does that way.
Yeah.
Let's move on to something quickly, and then I'd want to move on to a bigger topic. Number one, of course, we could kind of pontificate on our identity and our responsibilities, but none of this is possible without the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Without addressing God, right? We could address the elephants in the room, but let's address God, right? In prayer. What's the role of prayer in this whole thing? I don't want it to go without saying, but maybe more specifically, what's the role of prayer in the Multiply Conference? How do we tie that in with kind of this excitement and all that? What's the role?
Yeah, I have some immediate resonance with some of the things. We had a comment from John Hookema, I think, great comment. He's the prayer shepherd. He's in the role of being prayer shepherd in a denomination. And I think his comment is good. Probably, there's some slight mentions of prayer in those action steps, but probably a little deficient thinking about the role of prayer. And so I think very, very good comment, good adjustment that needs to be made as we think about action steps leading the conference. I think he's right. God longs to answer our prayers. And I know for me, when I first came to Sunlight, one of the things that struck me about Port St. Lucie was it was just a tremendous mission field. And I was reading in the Gospel of Matthew, and I came to chapter 9. I realize the story's in the other Gospels too, but for me, it's always Matthew 9 that I think about. Jesus, it says, looked at the crowds. He saw that they were harassed and that they were like sheep without a shepherd. And then he turned to his disciples and he said, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And I thought to myself, wow, what a great description of Port St. Lucie. I think there's a tremendous harvest to be had here, but there's so few people. There's so few churches in this town. There's so few leaders in our churches. Anyway, what does Jesus give as his recommendation? Prayer. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send workers into the harvest field. And after I came across that, I really took that prayer seriously. And it's something that has been a constant prayer of mine. I'm asking God to send workers into the harvest field. And I think God has answered my prayer here in Port St. Lucie. When I look at all the disciples and leaders that have been raised up, people who are at work in this harvest field. And I keep praying because I still think the harvest is even more plentiful and the workers are way too few. So I keep praying. But I think when we're talking about planting 1,000 churches or raising up 2,000 leaders in the next decade, what we're realizing is there is a tremendous mission field in North America. And, man, we're just so few in number. So Jesus already told us what we're supposed to be doing, and the answer is prayer. So I think that is what we've got to be doing. Now, I have I've had this personal conviction over the last number of years that the Bible has in it a prayer book, which is supposed to teach us how to pray. And we have completely neglected that, or we've set it aside, or very few people are aware of it. So to me, I think what I discovered is at the heart of the Protestant Reformation, the Reformed tradition, is this book of prayer, the Psalms, which was a very big deal. And I believe that recovering the Psalms are going to be a big part of the renewal. So I'll say prayer in general, but now I kind of personally have a vision in specific. And I really believe that the Psalter has to return to the church, and that the average Christian person should know all 150 Psalms, but doesn't at all. And the main reason is it's gone out of our worship music. And so that's been a huge project in my life. If I think about what is the obstacle or the problem, all of a sudden that's one of the responsibilities that I feel like I've personally taken up because I feel God calling me to it, which is, I've heard other people talking about a call to prayer. This is the call to prayer I feel like I have, is to teach people how to pray, not based on my own thoughts, but based on the very examples that we have in the Bible that I believe are the prayers of Jesus.
So you're saying the role of prayer, to give it an edge, the role of prayer in the conference, like in your life, is, we need to turn to God in prayer, but more specifically, turn to the Psalms.
And that'll be a feature of this conference, which people might be surprised by. We are definitely going to sing and pray the Psalms here.
Yeah, very good. Very good. And I think we'll learn more about that. There's been other past episodes of the DSP, certainly on the Psalter. All right, I'd like to address the final topic for today. What's behind the tension between the centralized top-down action and planning for the denomination versus the local church movements, especially something like if Classis Southeast is hosting a conference, how does the tension work itself out between the centralized denominational offices versus the local churches?
Oh, wise one.
I knew that moniker would come back to get me. I knew it. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting because you have a unique perspective, having both worked in local ministries and having worked for the denominational offices. So I think when it comes to the interaction between the local church and the denominational offices, you might have a unique perspective and history that guides your vast wisdom.
All right. Are you ready for the wisdom?
Oh,
yeah, man. No. I see it shining off your head.
I think the way that I want to start is from my experience of working within the denomination. There is a sincere desire by denominational employees to respond to the needs of the church, to meet the needs of the church, to help the church to fulfill its mission. I mean, it's really, everybody I worked with, really a strong desire. There isn't anybody there who's like, how can I control this big thing, right? Like, how can I get my own will and agenda done?
Yeah.
It just does not exist. Yeah. What does exist, I think, is there is a gap between when we're working in Grand Rapids or Burlington and at the classes, especially classes that are far flung like Southeast U.S., we just don't have a lot of proximity interaction with those folks who work for our denomination. And so I know when working with Thrive and wanting to see churches grow healthy, I know there was only so much we could do in terms of reaching out, because you can reach out and ask, hey, what can we do to better serve you? And you're limited by the responses that you get. And I think it's easy when you're in a class as far from Grand Rapids or Burlington to look at what's happening over there and wondering, why are they putting their efforts into that? That's not what we want. It's not what we ask them to do. So I think there's just a bit of that. It's like a communication proximity kind of thing. So I think that's where some of the tension can arise, when there's just not enough understanding of why this is happening in this way. And so to counter that, what I would say is, man, if you're a classis leader, make sure that you're engaging. I mean, I know Thrive has it for regional pastors and church visitors. They have regular meetings, right? Zoom meetings that you can be a part of. Whenever there's something that you can do and be a part of with the denomination, do it. They're a resource for us, for the local church. They're hired to serve the church broadly. And so I think it's a great way to ease some of that tension and to be in the know. But at the same time, I think another tension can arise when those who are tasked with providing some direction for the ministries of the CRC, when something like this conference, for example, arises not from there, even though it's resonate, so it is from there. There's just ownership. Are we stepping into an area where we shouldn't? Are we providing the kind of leadership that we shouldn't? I think that's an important question. So, because the question is, what is the role of the local church, and what is the responsibility of the local church to take responsibility for something, to dream, to hope, to make a plan, and to do? How does that fit in our current system?
Yeah, who's responsible for meaningful change here? The local church, denominational offices, top down. Scott, what are your thoughts, reactions?
Over the course of time, I've probably seen that one of the wonderful things God does is that He reigns over all of our lives and all of our ministries directly, not through intermediaries, in terms of other human beings. So I think this is part of our overall Reformed philosophy, that we didn't need a pope or bishops, because God is ruling and reigning over the local church. And I think it's part of the reason why we consider the local church to be the highest level of authority in our Reformed system of church government, and then classis and synod to be delegated authority. Now, I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds here, but I think there's been a lot of wisdom in realizing that every local context will understand much better than some centralized office how to respond to the particular obstacles or challenges that are being thrown up. And so I think our denomination as a whole has always affirmed, our theology affirms the decentralized local context. I feel like that's probably been challenged in recent years, because we do have a framework out of which we're all operating, which is that we sign a covenant for office bearers that will operate within this confessional framework. So when it comes to doctrinal issues and other things, there is something that we agree that we're all bound by. But within that framework now, okay, this is what's going to happen in your local ministry. You got to find that out. And I think, one of the things that I think we're wrestling with as a denomination is, what is the definition of a denomination? Years and years and years ago, it probably seemed best to the churches, given that they didn't speak the language of the culture, or a whole variety of reasons that we were probably shy with regard to engaging culture. It seemed best that we create kind of a central office, and then that central office would do the foreign missions and the home missions and church planting, and the ministries would kind of operate out of that office. And so the churches kind of delegated those types of ministries. Even youth ministry was done more centralized to that centralized entity. I think probably as a result, just in CRC parlance, when we talk about the denomination, we're talking about these offices and agencies. Probably the best definition of a denomination really is a gathering of churches with a similar mission, history, theology, philosophy, whatever you'd like to say about it. But the key is it's a gathering or collection of churches. And I think there's probably some dance that we're doing as more and more churches are realizing, wait a second, the job of church planting and raising up leaders doesn't belong there, it belongs here. Youth ministry isn't something that's done there, it's done here.
Locally, you mean?
Locally, right? And I think churches are kind of, especially as they're engaging with the world, engaging with culture, they're realizing, like, we can't delegate out the job of leadership development and church planting, like, away to some centralized agencies and offices, actually. And I think the agencies and offices are actually, they're in that same conversation, realizing, like, okay, wait, we're not the ones who are supposed to plant churches. Actually, churches plant churches. So we're all having the same kind of like dialogue, trying to figure that out. And I suppose, probably there's some new realities that are occurring as a result of that tension or dialogue. But I think over the course of time, one of the things that I believe needs to strengthen so that we can raise up leaders and plant churches is, in general, the individual churches related to their classis, but maybe not to each other quite as well. They related more to the central agencies or offices. And I think actually we have to create friendships and relationships from churches from here to British Columbia and from Maine to California, that now there are technologies that make this very available. We can learn from each other. And so I think we're moving back toward a definition of the denomination that is a collection of local churches, and we need to strengthen the relationships that we have with each other. I think that's going to be necessary for the task of church planting that's in front of us. And probably there's going to be some figuring this out as we go.
Yeah, so let's just name back to what we were talking about. The obstacle is the need for more disciples, the need for more leaders, and the need for more churches. That's just like that's the obstacle, as it were. And are we saying that who's responsible for that obstacle? Do we wait for a centralized, charge or vision from the denomination, or do we as churches localize that responsibility and say, this is our responsibility and we need to take that? And I think the obvious answer we're concluding to is like, I think that's the local responsibility for every pastor and every church to take those obstacles on themselves, and we don't have to wait.
Well, and part of this too, now if we follow the dream cycle, I think when it comes to facing obstacles, one is to have the Superman, I can do it alone approach. Like, I got all the answers and I can figure this out myself. I think actually we got to lean into the truth, which is God is accomplishing his mission through his people, and we have to work together. And I think with such a large obstacle in front of us, which is just the rise of secularism and the decline of Christianity in the West, if we all just try to be lone rangers, I think we're playing into the playbook of the devil. We've got to find ways to work together, and that's not always easy. You know, we've all got our pride, we've all got our jealousies, we've all got our whatever. We tend to be suspicious of each other, we tend to whatever. So how can we find ways to overcome all those obstacles to get to the unity? If we're going to raise up 2,000 leaders, there's no one person who can do that. We gotta find a huge coalition of people who want to work together. If we want to plant 1,000 churches, there's no way we can do that individually. No one person can do that. We got to find a coalition of willing people who want to work together. And I think, yeah, those are important thoughts to have. So I think there is this kind of challenge as we're trying to navigate from one reality to another, just the differing philosophies here. We got to do that in conversation with each other and get that figured out.
Could I just adjust? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think another cause of the tension is just purely structural. We as local churches have delegated authority to classis, who then delegate authority to synod. And so, and synod has created these offices and agencies that we're talking about as like centralized to help the whole denomination deal with big things. And so that's what the denominational agencies do, is they deal with the big things. Raising disciples, planting churches, raising up leaders are big things. And so, I really could see there being this conflict or tension of saying, okay, well, if we're the ones who have been tasked with dealing with the big things, what is Southeast doing? Like, why are they trying to tackle a denominationally big thing without us? I think it's just important to get out on the table is to say a couple of things is, one, well, we're partnering with Resonate, and it's a classis that's doing it, which is, I think, significant.
And our classis brought these issues to synod.
Yeah, and with full goodwill. Like, I do think, at least from being here and around, I've never heard anything like, we're doing this because they're not, or they won't. We're all a part of this denomination. We want to see it. And a reality could have been is we could have sent out these invites, and everybody else in all of our churches could have just said, we're not going to that.
Yeah.
Why would we do this? And so, yeah, at the end of the day, I just hope that it can really be seen as something we're doing together and with, not instead of.
Let me address the fear then.
Can I add something to it?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is now just thinking out loud. I don't even know what I'm about to say. I think if you view the history of our denomination, we're probably caught in a bad cycle. Here's what I mean by that. I think as far back as you would consider our history, you will find that our denomination has been fighting about one issue or another. So we're fighting about grace, whether God dispenses common grace to people or not. Then we're fighting about the inspiration and authority of Scripture, like how to read the Bible, and how general revelation plays into all of that. And there's these huge fights where people find themselves against each other. And then, inclusive gender language with regard to Scripture. When the Bible, says, I'll just, what is man that you care for him? The Son of Man, that you should, what is man that you're mindful of him? The Son of Man that you care for him. Is that all humanity, or is that only one gender because our language changed? So then there's fight about, but what about God always calls himself he? So how do we think about that? And we had fights about that. Then there are fights about, women serving in ecclesiastical offices. And more recently, there's been fights about human sexuality. I think, one of the things we're really good at is having debates and fighting. And most of our fights have always resulted in people leaving. There have been little splinters off, the Protestant Reformed Church, the United Reformed Church. Now maybe people are leaving for the RCA or some other thing. So our fights have always resulted in us kind of like, I don't know, at tension with each other and a winner and a loser, or I don't know. Maybe it's completely naive for me to say something like this, but I'm thinking that we have to have something positive that unifies us rather than issues that divide us. And I believe actually the mission of the church is a way bigger thing that could unite us. And I think part of our distress as Classis Southeast is like, as important as these conversations are, should they really dominate everything we're doing? And I think we're hoping that gospel, disciple multiplication, leader multiplication, church multiplication will start to take over our passions, and that will unify around something positive rather than finding the next thing we can fight over, because I'm sure there's something right around the corner that we could fight over.
Sure.
But are we weary yet from all this fighting? I don't know. I guess my own viewpoint is that this conversation was necessary. We needed to clarify and define who we are. But now, let's get out of this kind of fight cycle, and let's work together as much as we possibly can.
I think one of the things that would perpetuate a fight cycle, or these fights, is like a fear, right? And let's just address the fear and put it to bed. What steps must we take to ensure that a multiplying disciples, leaders, churches movement, this Multiply conference, doesn't create a faction or doesn't splinter off from the CRC, or doesn't, is instead a faithful arm of the church's mission, rather than let's just address the fear and put it to bed. What steps are we taking and must be taken to make sure that this multiplying movement is not seen as something that is antagonistic or wants to split off, but actually is a faithful arm in sharing in the mission of the CRC?
I think we've already done part of that, is to say this is a denominational conversation where we haven't decided what we're going to do, but we're gathering all of us together to talk about what should we do, what can we do. And that's an important framework for me anyways, for the action steps, is the action steps aren't what's going to happen. They're a starting place. So some of the things like the 2,000 leaders, that number is going to be revised as classes determine what they can do, or if they're going to participate. And I think that's just the way to see it, is like, we want to start somewhere. The first step is to get everybody talking.
I think, in my thought process here, one of the things I love about this conference is that it truly is a coalition of the willing. It was one of our biggest blessings, an obstacle to the conference for sure. Go back to our graphic, that we didn't have any money. So everyone who is coming has to pay their own way. And even when it comes to like serving meals or hosting the location, there was a conference fee that people have to contribute to. So we hope to have as comfortable and as wonderful a conference as possible, but it is truly a coalition of the willing. And I view that as a positive. It's not like there's anyone who's being forced into something that they're against. And there may be people who have different ideas who show up here that we'll give the opportunity to listen to their voice as well. They'll contribute, which is great. I think, something good can happen maybe when the initiative comes out of people's complete willingness rather than anyone exercising authority. So, in a sense, there's not going to be any musts that result from this conference anyway. Like, you guys out there must now do this. No one has to do anything. It'll truly be, we all see together some positive hope and vision, and we are deciding that we're going to work together to try to tackle it. Maybe we'll be able to, maybe we won't. The results will be left up to God. But I would view it a negative if big negative if all of a sudden some kind of factions arose, like we're better, you're worse. I think actually there is a heart which is enough with the dissension among us, let's come together. And if there are those who, and this is going to be true of any kind of movement, if there's going to be a movement, there'll be the early adopters, and then, then you'll have your late adopters and those who just like can't stand it at all. They'll just be very, very slow to get on board. I think that'll be normal. But we shouldn't turn to the people who are slow to be on board and be like, what's wrong with you? No. Yeah, we're all sons and daughters of the Most High God, responding to His calling the best we know how. And so we have to defer to each other and believe the best about each other and consider others better than ourselves and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. You guys have any other final thoughts on this? Not in general. I thought it was a very good conversation. It was winding, but it all ties together, because when it comes down to identity and the responsibility of an obstacle, you could take that from a micro perspective into ourselves as individuals, into a macro perspective as a denomination or as a classis or as a movement. All these questions and conversations are important to struggle with, and we're hoping to have them with you at the Multiply Conference. Register down in the link below, and we're excited to see you all there November 8, 9, 10, and 11 if you're joining us for the pre-conference. Certainly a lot of this identity-shaping conversation needs to be had throughout our denomination, and we're certainly excited to have you. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next episode of the Disciple Standard Podcast.
The future is now.